And my view is the economy's in pretty rough shape. Now, it also, though, it strikes me, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, there's a little bit of a two-tier economy. I mean, the people who, are doing better than average are hanging in there. I mean, they're all getting hurt, but they're hanging in there. I think the average American, the median person is just getting killed. I mean, I feel like I'm getting killed, and my income's okay. So I can only imagine what somebody who's working at a lower wage is facing in terms of the costs that they're encountering, and it's tragic. The money is broken, and we are getting to kind of the end of the can kicking road, in my opinion. I don't see any willingness on the part of government to cut the spending, and I think the numbers just came out a day or two ago for the July deficit, and it's just every month it's just records. I mean, if you look at the month-on-month growth on the debt, I mean, it really is kind of a parabola what's going on with cost of the debt, interest costs, size of the debt, government deficit. I mean, they are all just getting bigger and bigger in a reflexive cycle. And where does that stop? What we need to do, we've got too much debt, and we actually need to just repudiate the debt or restructure the debt. And there's no way, I mean, the debt holders are not going to get paid in full. That's just, full stop. So people who own debt and people who have fiat currency are, they're basically sitting ducks for massive wealth loss. And they don't realize that, but they are. Yep. So the next one's going to be bigger still, right? And each of these represents monetary debasement. And of course, the implication for that is that, gold will be at 5,000 and Bitcoin will be at 200,000. So because they can't be printed.
Lepard begins by addressing the recent discussions about inflation, which some claim to be under control, hovering around 2 to 3%. He dismisses these numbers as cooked, arguing that the real inflation rate is much higher. He provides personal examples, such as the 100% increase in insurance costs for his summer home and the 30% hike in auto insurance premiums, to illustrate the disconnect between reported inflation and the reality that Americans are facing. According to Lepard, the Federal Reserve's mandate of price stability, which should imply zero inflation, has been diluted to a point where 2 to 3% inflation is considered acceptable. However, this level of inflation still erodes purchasing power and significantly impacts the average citizen. Lepard is convinced that the U.S. economy is already in a recession, despite official reports suggesting otherwise. He points to the manipulation of employment data, where fudge factors and death models obscure the true state of the labor market. Lepard highlights that the recent increase in unemployment by 50 basis points is a sign of the underlying economic weakness. He believes that the real GDP is declining when adjusted for true inflation, which is higher than reported. Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
Look, all these numbers are cooked. I mean, and clearly inflation is probably down from the 9% peak that we hit, in June a year ago. I mean, it's interesting. There was some tweets this morning that I put out. I mean, these people are all excited about inflation that's maybe running in the high 2s, low 3s. I mean, whatever happened to the Fed mandate of price stability, which would imply zero inflation? That kind of, I don't know how they've dumbed down inflation to be 2 or 3%, because that's pretty meaningful in my mind. And so I would react in two ways. I mean, one, I say bullshit, because I just, as an example, a piece of property I owned, the summer house I spent time in, the insurance on it just went up 100% year over year. So that's a big difference from 3%. And I'm not sure where that gets factored into the CPI. Probably doesn't. But, my auto insurance, same story, up 30% year on year. So, and I think most Americans are experiencing the exact same event, that these numbers are just kind of made up. And their reactions. I mean, it all is really kind of a simulation. I mean, the mainstream media is really kind of a simulation. I actually didn't pay much attention to this morning's release, because I was like, okay, here comes another lie. It doesn't really matter, right? my view is we are in recession. I think they're cooking these numbers too. I mean, certainly on a real basis. I mean, you can see some nominal numbers going up, but if there's a lot more inflation than is reported, then the actual real GDP would be going down, which I believe it is. As you're aware, we just triggered the Psalm rule, which is to say that the unemployment number just went up 50 basis points off its lower level. And I think you tweeted recently about the employment numbers not looking good. And I suspect they're worse than reported because, as you know, they're able to, they have a fudge factor in there where they can, they have a birth death model and, people that don't report. So my view is the economy's in pretty rough shape. Now, it also, though, it strikes me, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, there's a little bit of a two-tier economy. I mean, the people who, are doing better than average are hanging in there. I mean, they're all getting hurt, but they're hanging in there. I think the average American, the median person is just getting killed. I mean, I feel like I'm getting killed, and my income's okay. So I can only imagine what somebody who's working at a lower wage is facing in terms of the costs that they're encountering, and it's tragic. Inflation broke America. We are broken because the monetary system is broken, and I've been saying the money's broken for a long time. And then Lynn came along and wrote a great book entitled it that. So I didn't steal it from her; she didn't steal it from me. We both came to the same conclusion. The monetary system is broken, and fiat money is destined to fail. I mean, Voltaire said this, 200 years ago. It always returns to its intrinsic value, which is zero. And we set in motion a process of inflation that is a perfect example of what I call Stein's law, which Herbert Stein was a Nixon economist. That if something cannot go on forever, it will end. And a lot of people criticize Keynes, and we, as you are aware, we all are aware, the world kind of runs on a Keynesian economic model, which is, use debt to stimulate demand, to create growth. And, if you need more growth, you just take on more debt. And the problem with that is, as my pinned tweet shows, is that if the debt grows faster than the underlying capability of paying the debt, eventually you reach a crisis point where, you're unable to service the debt. And I reference Ray Dalio's great work in my book, which just shows that these have happened for, hundreds of years over and over again. I mean, this is not something new or unusual. It's a little unusual in the sense that, we're doing it with the world's reserve currency, right? A lot of the other high inflation / hyperinflations have been in more third world countries, although, the Weimar one in the 1920s was a very developed nation. But the point is that, the money is broken, and we are getting to kind of the end of the can kicking road, in my opinion. And so, something will have to give. And there are a lot of ways this could occur, which, I'm going to try and discuss in the book. But, in my opinion, the most civilized way to do it would be a monetary reset. I mean, a lot of people criticize what FDR did. I know my grandfather criticized him. I don't think it was right that he seized the gold. But actually restructuring, devaluing the dollar in gold terms in a deflationary event was the right thing to do. I mean, he had to do it. And when he did it, the market rallied in 34, right after when he did it. And it started the process of recovery. Now, Smoot-Hawley and a lot of other things made the Depression go a lot longer than it should have. But the point is that what we need to do, we've got too much debt, and we actually need to just, repudiate the debt or restructure the debt. And there's no way. I mean, the debt holders are not going to get paid in full. That's just, full stop. So people who own debt and people who have fiat currency are, they're basically sitting ducks for massive wealth loss. And they don't realize that, but they are. And so, we've got to do a restructuring. I mean, now, if we don't do it in a structured manner, via a gold reset or a Bitcoin reset, the way that Loomis or Luke Roman has spoken about, then fine. It's going to happen in an uncontrolled manner, which is to say we'll have hyperinflation. And, that's not typically a good thing because that's what led, the Germans to choose Hitler. So, want to avoid that.
Lepard is critical of the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government's fiscal policies. He points out that the growing debt, increasing interest costs, and rising deficits are creating a vicious cycle that cannot be sustained. The Fed's balance sheet has ballooned to $7 trillion, and Lepard predicts that in the next financial crisis, the Fed will have to print even more money, leading to further monetary debasement. He forecasts that this will drive gold to $5,000 per ounce and Bitcoin to $200,000, as these assets cannot be printed and will therefore hold their value in an inflationary environment.
So what we're going to do is we are going to do a monetary reset, and we're going to revalue, we're going to create a new dollar, and we're going to revalue the dollar to a fixed amount of oil or gold or Bitcoin or something that cannot be printed. And on a go-forward basis, the government is going to live within its means, and we will have this new sound money standard. Now, the immediate problem with that, from the point of view of a lot of people who have a lot of money, a lot of power, is it would very vastly devalue all the old money. So those people who have a ton of money denominated in the old dollar would take enormous losses. But for, the guy who's a plumber who has, a house and not a lot of debt and, the ability to, provide useful services, he'd suddenly be working for sound money, and he could save in that money, and it would be, he'd be able to save for his retirement and retire, comfortably and blah, blah, blah. For the financial actors, this would be a nightmare. And that's why, and they control the system, and that's why they don't want to do that. That's why they won't do that, probably until we get driven right to the brink. But, those of us in the sound money community, Judy Shelton is one of them, and there are a ton of us out there talking about ways to actually restructure the system and to try and make it fair. And there are things you could talk about, with respect to that. There's some people who say, well, you've got to have inflation, and, maybe you do, but, I don't think you do. I take that back. It's tricky, Peter. The answer is it's tricky, and sadly there are going to be, any way you look at it, there are going to be winners and losers. But returning to a sound money standard, so let's say we have a hyperinflation, which a lot of people think is absolutely impossible, and I don't think it's highly likely, but I don't think it's impossible. Let Kamala win, put in Stephanie Kelton as the Treasury Secretary, and we're gonna have hyperinflation, right? And the hyperinflations are horrible. Everybody who has saved up wealth in the old currency loses it all, right? Farmers don't lose because they have land, and people who have the ability to, young people who can work, they don't lose, or they lose, but they can, they got the rest of their career. Retirees on fixed pensions, they get destroyed. But generally speaking, in hyperinflation, and I've studied this, things recover pretty quickly post hyperinflation when you go back to sound money. There's a lot of damage done, but a sound money system. Look, everybody in the morning just wants to get up and go to work and put food on the table and, love their family and live their life. That's 99% of the population of the world. The 1% that are psychopaths, they want to start wars and kill other people and have power and, do evil shit. And, those are the kind of people we should put in jail. And the rest of us who just want to work. So, my view is that even if we have to go through the hyperinflation event, it'll be better on the other side, much better, very quickly, if we can avoid the war. I don't see any willingness on the part of government to cut the spending. And I think the numbers just came out a day or two ago over for the July, deficit. And it's just every month it's just records. If you look at the month-on-month growth on the debt, it really is kind of a parabola, what's going on with cost of the debt, interest costs, size of the debt, government deficit. They are all just getting bigger and bigger in a reflexive cycle. And, where does that stop? The Fed balance sheet is $7 trillion. I think in the next event, when something breaks, when the next Silicon Valley Bank event comes, or, the next Japanese unwinding, who knows how many swap lines we've given to them. I wish Bernie Sanders would file an FOA asking for what the Fed did in terms of swap lines to Japan, because I'm sure we gave them a lot of money to buy our bonds and to buy their own. That they're going to have to come back in with the printer going burr, bigger than ever. Each one of these events becomes bigger. It took Bernanke, 5 or 6 years to print 3 trillion. In COVID, what do we print? 5 trillion in, 2 years, less than 2 years. Yeah. So, so the next one's going to be bigger still. Right. And each of these represents monetary debasement. And of course, the implication for that is that, gold will be at 5,000 and Bitcoin will be at 200,000. So, because they can't be printed. So, you can see that kind of stuff coming, but, we have to, it takes time, right? They're right now, I think now the goal, I'm sure, is just let's they're trying to hold it all together through the election so that they can get their person in office. And I'm sure they will, bend the rules, use the exchange stabilization fund. I mean, that's one thing. I don't think enough people focus on the fact that they have an exchange stabilization fund, which is billions and billions of dollars. I don't have the number right off the top of my head, but it's a large fund, and they can use that to manipulate markets. I mean, as an example, when this market recently took a plunge as a result of what was going on in Japan, you just know they were in there buying with both hands to keep this thing together. I mean, they cannot have this market go down. They just can't.
Lepard also touches on the manipulation of financial markets by the government, particularly through the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which is used to prop up markets during downturns. He believes that the government is focused on maintaining market stability at all costs, especially leading up to elections, to ensure that their preferred candidates win. This manipulation, however, only delays the inevitable collapse, according to Lepard. Please like and subscribe my channel.